welcome to our IndigiLit series. This is a series that highlights books by Indigenous or Native authors, and today we will be discussing Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So first we're going to introduce ourselves. My name is Marissa, and I work in the outreach department at the library. And let's start with our facilitator, Ariel.
Hello, my name is Ariel Ojibway. You can say Ani or Bozu to say hello. I'm from the Sioux tribe. I work at the U of M library, and I'm just a big fan of plants and bugs and animals, and am honored to be facilitating here today. I will popcorn to Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim. I am a desk clerk at the library. I also love plants and animals and all things like this. And I have been meaning to read this book for like a decade. So I'm really happy that I have this opportunity to not only read it, but talk about it. Yeah, I will popcorn over to Bam.
Oh, hey, they call me Bam. My name's Beth. I'm on the outreach team. And yeah, I look forward to discussing this book that I'd seen was very popular and didn't know anything about it, but I'm going to popcorn to Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a librarian here at AADL, and I'll hand off to Valerie.
I'm Valerie. I work in the collections department. I do the cataloging of new stuff, mostly foreign language, and I'll pop it over to Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I work in the archives as a library technician at the library. And like a few people here, I've also been meaning to read this book for quite a long time. It's crazy that it's been out for a decade. And here we are reading it and discussing it.
I'm happy to hop in. I am Audrey. I am a librarian, and I'm really excited to talk about this book.
And I'm Krista, and I'm a desk clerk at the library, and I have also been meaning to read this book for quite some time.
Yeah, someone might have mentioned that a lot of people talk about braiding sweetgrass, but have you ever actually read it? So I'm really glad that this has been the impetus for reading for so many of us. That's so great. So for just like an easy beginning thing, I was thinking, sort of as a nod to the Haudenosaunee address, Thanksgiving address, we could each talk about if there was like a plant friend or mentor or animal or space that's been special to us, either like at the beginning of this year or maybe during the pandemic when we couldn't leave our houses. Any special teacher like that in your life?
I'll throw in my obsession with milkweed that started in 2020. I've actually always loved milkweed. Like when I was a little kid, my grandma would take us and like go harvest the milkweed husks and make like ornaments out of them. And always been really into butterflies. So when I got my first place, I found a milkweed plant growing in the yard. And I was like, oh, this looks like a weed, but it's not a weed. It's a milkweed plant. And shortly after, I noticed there were some monarch caterpillars, and I became super fascinated with that. And so that also like kind of stemmed into a larger appreciation of native plants for me. So that was really special for me in the past couple of years.
I love that. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. There's 9 of us. We're going to cut each other off. Something that I've been thinking about lately, especially in the way that things grow and that plants work together, is one of the ways that my now husband convinced me to move in with him during the pandemic is he made a little above ground, just one plot that I could use to plant herbs. And so I, planted my parsley and my basil and my rosemary, and then threw some jalapenos in there for good measure. And these, plants all get along in this little square. And then garden goes on, it comes the time where you just let it rest. And about this time of year, some plants started coming up. And I realized that whoever lived in this house before my husband did had planted bulbs in this space. And they were somehow planted so deep that even though he totally redid this raised bed, they still made it up. And this is now its third year. And the little bulbs just started coming up. And I kind of love that this space has managed to be a shared space, and that not, getting to still have the herbs right outside my kitchen, which I can't wait until I replant those in another couple months. But that at this beginning of spring, I get to see some flowers that are resilient enough to make it up through all of the herbs that are just left kind of chilling out in the winter.
Well, I can go because that reminds me of my spot, which is my neighbor's yard. Because there's a corner in the neighborhood and their house is there. And I don't know, is it the sunniest? Is it the warmest? I don't know. But every year, that's where the first flowers come. So I'm so creepy and like slowly walk by and just like get down into their yard looking for the first ones. And I think like 2.5 weeks ago, I saw the first snowdrops. So it's coming.
Yeah. I'll go. So my husband and I bought our first house in 2021, and I inherited a lot of different plants, a lot of plants that were not very well taken care of. However, I discovered that in our yard grow 5 elm trees, and they're all very small still, which is good because 2 are growing right next to our house that we have to take care of. But I spent a very long time reading about elms and realized just how rare they are in the Midwest now. And so it's become like my personal pet project to make sure that all 5 of these elms will grow and thrive. And even though we have to remove some from our house eventually, it's going to be done like in the most caring way that I can. And I'm going to try so hard to preserve those guys, whether or not they stick with us throughout this house or to the next house. I love these little elms. I'm so happy that they're here and that they're still like hanging on and thriving. So I got to find a way to get them away from my house where that keeps both of us safe. But that I've spent like the past like 1.5 years just trying to make sure that these elms stay happy and healthy and growing, because we need more and we need them back.
Excuse me, I'll go. Sorry. So I wasn't really prepared for this question, but as I've been thinking, gosh, like 20 years ago, my husband planted an acorn in the backyard, and we have a little oak tree, but unfortunately it's currently like on the DTE wires, and they let us know they're going to be trimming trees, and in our neighborhood. And I want to make sure that they're very careful with this guy. It's tall and the leaves are big, but it's also it's so gratifying to know when you do something as seemingly innocuous as putting a little acorn in the ground that it can grow, and that's pretty cool.
In our family, it's been a pussy willow tree. It started with my brother planting one at my grandparents' house. And then my grandparents were going to move. And my brother was just devastated because what was going to happen to his pussy willow tree. And so my grandfather actually dug it up. It was still small enough he could dig it up, and brought it to our house. And swear my brother was going to drown the thing during that summer because, my grandfather said, you got to keep it watered and stuff. But it grew, And then when we moved to this house, we took a cutting of it and grew one here. And then when my brother got his house last year or the year before, when they bought their house, we took another cutting and put it at his house. So this pussy willow tree has definitely made it through the generations. And then I've also been interested in plants just because I like to go to the parks and take pictures of plants and see what they are and how many are native and how many are invasive and that kind of thing. So that's me with plants. I don't like dirt gardening. I have a small little water garden, but I don't like dirt gardening.
I can go. I can't think of any one plant, but because I've always grown up with plants, my father was a master gardener. And then my husband works for English Gardens. So when we bought our house in 2015, there was nothing in the yard. It was just grass and clover, and that was pretty much it. So we've planted 2 apple trees, a redwood, I think a sumac. I always forget what it's called. And just like countless gardens for vegetables and flowers and plants. And I noticed yesterday the helleborus is up. So spring is coming.
I had so many plants come to mind, which is good in the spirit of Thanksgiving. But spring is like my favorite time of year. So there's a park near my house, and the spring plants are so short-lived that I always like to go and see when they're coming up. And then as everybody was talking about trees, really, in my backyard, I have a couple pawpaw trees. In the past few years, I've been absolutely obsessed with pawpaw and finding them. And so I bought 2 trees maybe 4 years ago and planted them. And then I bought 3 more last year. And one I accidentally planted too close to some moles, and like the whole tree just got like sucked into the ground. I was like, this is the hole where I planted the pawpaw, and it's gone. But yeah, I'm just like playing the long game, waiting so I can eat some pawpaw fruit.
I also had a lot of plants pop into my mind, but I guess the one that I thought of most, like that was the biggest in my mind this morning, was like pine trees. I used to like play in them when you're a little kid because you can go in there and they're like natural little forts. And my daughter is now old enough that she has also figured that out. So like her favorite thing on walks is to go in and play in the like pine trees and hide in there. So I like, that's a thing that I'm thankful for, and also like cool to see that it's like a thing that like kids kind of figure out on their own, and seems to be kind of maybe universal. I don't know other kids, but it was cool to see her do the same thing.
I definitely did the same thing when I was a kid. We had a big pine tree in our front yard.
I still, when I'm walking by a big pine, I think about that. I think about my young self and going, reading a book, under a tree or in a forsythia bush many, many years ago, like a really long time ago. I still remember that. But.
Yeah, they give so much comfort and protection. In my parents' yard, that's where the deer sleep, over in a far corner under all the pine trees. So I have some questions that we could start with, but the pine trees reminded me of the section of finding the spruce roots and following them. And like we were saying before this started, there are just so many things that we could be talking about. And I remember when I first read this book, there was a particular part that like really hit home for me and changed things. So was there any part of the book that spoke to you like that like really changed your mind about anything, or just spoke to you? And if there's not, I can prompt you with some questions, or I could just read about them. I can say we can talk about the grammar of animacy, about like the different forms that water was taking. Like I loved how she got really frustrated when learning Potawatomi and was like, what to be a bae, like, when are you going to need that? That's absurd. But then I didn't catch that as much until this second time around. And then I was like, it's such an awesome understanding of water to know when you're looking at a bay, it's not just a stagnant thing. It's not just a bay. It's a bay now, and it will always be. Like, the water now is that, and then it'll be something else later as it moves through its life. And that was so cool to me. Yep, we could talk about Sky Woman. Okay, I'm just gonna, anybody go?
I'll say, so I took several notes from home, but now I'm not home, so none of my notes are here. But I was really struck by, I think the chapter was something about harvest. And it was about, like asking for, permission, I guess, that whole aspect of gardening. It just made me think about how I want to go into my gardening season differently and be more appreciative and respectful. And maybe I'll find out that the plants that I wanted to grow in a certain spot aren't going to work there. And, just really be more intuitive about it and ask permission. I liked that, getting down in it. So that was cool. It was inspiring.
That just reminded me. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It just was a tidbit of like talking with your plants and asking them things and the honorable harvest. Like, my aunt gave me some strawberries a while ago, and I planted them, and I planted some other things with them sometimes. And then I planted garlic, and my strawberries were like, what are you doing? I am not into this. And for a while I was like, am I imagining things? And then I think after like a month, I was like, I'm not, this is not okay. And I Googled it, of course. And then, yeah, strawberries and garlic, they hate each other. They don't want to be next to each other. And strawberries and asparagus are good buddies. But listen, if you have strawberries, don't put them with your garlic. Yeah. Sorry, Elizabeth.
That's interesting because I have some strawberries near asparagus, so did it right. There was something that really struck me like early on in reading, when she's trying to figure out why asters and goldenrod look so good together. And it's like, it's beautiful. And then everyone's like, well, beauty doesn't matter. And I remember feeling that way, like when I was first in college, because I just had like a different way of looking at things. And I would try to describe things as beautiful in classes. And they're like, don't say that. Don't ever say that. Like, and it's like, well, I think it's important to acknowledge that like we have these experiences and like the plants make us feel these things. And I think she does a really good job of that throughout the book.
Do you love how she like destroyed that argument was it at the end of the chapter or later on in the book, and was like, actually it's because they look so good to each other or next to each other, to the bees, that you find them next to each other all of the time. So yes, science, you think that you're objective and that beauty has no place, but like beauty is a real thing in the world. So maybe you should open your mind and think about that a little bit more.
This book has made me think a lot about shifting my mindset from living things to living beings. And it's still something that, like, it takes time to change the way your brain looks at things. But I think a lot about my mom when I'm reading this. My mom, gosh, maybe 15 years ago, got really, really into vegetable gardening. And it happened when she briefly became an empty nester. And so it really was like the vegetables took over as her babies. And we used to tease her relentlessly because she called them her babies. She talked to her vegetables, and it was loving teasing. But I think she just gets it. And I asked my mom if she'd read this book, and she said, "Oh yes, it was in my book clubs, one of their top-rated books over the decades we've been reading." But thinking about the living beings of the harvest that she shares with us, and I've always been appreciative to her for that, but to this season to kind of shift that mindset to not just being appreciative to her, but being appreciative to the vegetables and the plants themselves. It's exciting to change your worldview a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things I loved along those lines was how this book is such a, like, I guess, good blueprint for thinking about how, like, ways of living in community where, like, you appreciate the gifts of everyone and everyone's individual gift and honor that gift. And her descriptions are so beautiful, and like showing how like the qualities of the plants like work within their context to be this like beautiful thing. Like, I'm also thinking of like the Three Sisters and that sort of thing, where she was talking about how you honor like part of our like part of the purpose of life is to like bring your gift to the world and carry it like honorably, and like, but in like using your gift, you're really like what you're doing is serving other people. And like when you put it together with like the animist ideas, it really is like this expansive idea of not just like being in community with other people, but like being in community with like the whole world. And I found that to be really like beautiful, frankly, and like it's like a very beautiful way to think about our place.
Going off of the going off of the Annecy a little bit, I found especially that part to be really validating. I think often, like I especially, but I think it's happened to a lot of people, like especially when we're young, we kind of personify everything around us, and we get told that from a science perspective, like, well, these things don't really have the kind of life that we have. We don't have to treat them in the same way that we would treat like a dog or a cat or another human being. And that kind of got really tamped down. Like in my head, I'd always like kind of give personality to plants and animals that I know that like science would probably not. And then reading this book, it was really validating to just sit back and think like, oh, I haven't been thinking incorrectly. Like I haven't been doing this wrong. I've just been doing this in a different way from what the people around me do and think, and that's okay. Like you're not like I'm not childish, and I'm not living in like a fantasy world by giving things animacy and giving things like life and spirit, even if it is like sometimes a pencil, whatever. I'm just like, I'm kind of tuned in a little bit to the animacy and the agency that plants and animals have, and it's okay to be that way. And it was just like, I actually like put the book down and I just thought about it for a little bit, and I journaled a little bit, and that part probably stuck out to me more than like the rest of the book, which is still fantastic. And still, I learned a lot, but that part was just really validating.
I think more even than it's okay to be that way, it's like, hey, that's the world we are living in. Like, right. I'm so glad that stuck out to you, because yeah, like, oh, maybe I see a personality in plants that science wouldn't say is there, but in the book she talks about, okay, yes, plant people, they're not speaking to you with mouths because they're right. not made the same as you, but it doesn't mean that they're not living, and plants teach us with their behaviors and the way that they grow and the gifts that they have to give. So they are speaking to you, and that I think goes to Beth's mentioning of the honorable harvest. And what you were saying, Audrey, just like, well, Robin Wall Kimmerer said it when she said, like, she's talking about plant gifts, and then she was talking about the gifts of that, like maybe your grandma would make cookies for you. And if your grandma makes a plate and gives it to you, that's wonderful. And you say, thank you, grandma. And then you have this relationship and you can give a gift back sometime or go visiting. But if you went and you ransacked your grandma's cupboard for the cookies without asking, then your grandma might be less inclined to invite you over or make you cookies in the future. And similarly, these plant people here are giving us their gifts, and they are the reasons that we are alive. And instead of just like taking as much as we can and not being grateful, like just honorable harvest, take what you need and be thankful and give back what you can. Yeah. I love this book.
To go off what Kim said, I definitely was raised to treat plants the way that you would an animal. That like if you hurt a plant, it cries out, it bleeds, it's injured. I actually did record, I think a few years ago, a plant screaming, and then they converted it to a sound wave that we can actually hear. And when I heard that, the headline was like, confirmed, plants do cry out. And I was like, I was literally raised with that. And I'm 40 years old. But with the language, I thought was really interesting when she talks about like to be water or to be different things. Because I have studied a few different languages, and it just popped in my head that in Japanese, they have two different words for being. One is for a living being, and one is for like a non-living being, except they use it for like plants are considered non-living. But they're also Shinto, and in Shinto, everything has spirit. So I just thought that was really interesting. Like I really like thinking about language.
Did what she said about language or the grammar of Annecy, the language part, stick with anyone else or change what you wanted to do? When I first read this book, I was like, wait, yeah, that is how I feel about my plant relatives. And she also talked about species loneliness, and how if you don't know the other beings around you, or as humans, we don't get to know them, or we just don't think of them as people and just pave them over or whatever, then it's easy to feel totally disconnected with the natural world. And I wanted to be in community more, so I started changing my language and saying like, who is this friend? Or like, what's going on with this friend over here? Who are you? And learning things like that. And I went on a plant walk the other day, and it's so like in me now that I forgot. And someone was holding onto a tree and like shaking it. And I was like, who is that? And they didn't answer me. And I was like, hey, who is that friend? And then my partner was like, what is that tree? And I was like, oh yeah. But it's fun to like try and change your language like that, because it does change your brain. And I saw another talk with Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she was saying, why did I say her whole name the whole time? It's like, you have to. She was talking about, instead of it, using key from some long Anishinaabe word. And she was like, I'm not kidding myself that anyone would use that word. But key in some other languages means like spirit, and also key is short. And yeah, she was like, well, what if we used key for our plant friends instead of it? And since like pronouns and everything are changing, I was like, ooh, I like that idea. And she was testing it on her students. So
I really love that idea. That's great.
The teacher-student dynamic was so great too. Sorry, Bailey, I've talked a lot. How about you go?
I was just saying the thinking of the language like that, it really struck me when she was talking about how if you're considering, a tree or a strawberry as a he or a she, how much more respect you give that. And it's different than thinking of it as an it. When it's an it can be easily harvested and sold for profit. But when it's a he or a she, you're maybe a little more gentle with it. And maybe, you do the honorable harvest and only take what you need and not the entire gift that the plant is giving. And that just kind of really stuck with me.
Something else that stuck with me in that chapter, it made me think about like when the white folks came to this land, and had they considered, learning from the indigenous folks instead of the way things went down, and continue to, but if they would have learned something about that kind of harvest, and maybe things would be different in our world today. Of course they would be, but it's kind of fantasy. But it was just like, gosh, they were just so ethnocentric, that it didn't even occur that these were actual human beings that have, live a real life and have a way about them that we could learn from. But anyway, it just kind of bummed me out.
Yeah, I really liked the story of the white man's footprint that was new to the land, but like made a home for it. Like it's not a native plant, but it functions as a native plant now because it became part of the community and wasn't like hurting other local ecosystem things. Doing a great job of talking today. But just also like the history of how long things are here. And like, there's also this idea in ecology of like native to when, because so many things just are moving around constantly. And like my family's been here for like 4 or 5 generations, maybe, when like that's a big difference from like tens of thousands of years that people have been here, and like the different knowledge that you get over that time span, and like the relationships that you build with place and plants. And there's something so gratifying about knowing the names of plants that like they don't teach that in schools. But it's so nice when I can say like, that's a trillium and that's a, mayapple. And like, there's a lot of plants that I don't know. But I feel like I can know them by naming them. And that's really special. And I don't know, it's just hard when like, there's no cultural history here. It's I forget how she described it very beautifully. But yeah, it's like, I felt it when I was reading that part. Like, there's not a lot of like my cultural traditions go back. My favorite traditions that I like for holidays that I celebrate are like 2 generations old, which is like so short compared to, thousands of years that other things have been existing for.
Speaking of cultural history, I want to ask about guy, woman, and maybe we'll just throw Eve in there too. But so I'll ask that question. But I also want to know, Emily, were you going to say something as well?
I was just going to say, some of the chapters that I found the easiest to jump right into were the teacher-student relations. And I think it's because as reading these books, we're kind of her students. But I loved the dynamic that she showed. It made you want to learn from her and from people like her, who approached the learning experience with hands-on and with open minds both ways. Those were the chapters that I found myself. I mean, I guess pacing was different. I also read half the book and listened to half the book. But those were the more propulsive chapters for me. And I think it was both because they were maybe a narrative structure that I'm more familiar with reading, communion between people, between human beings, rather than communion between person and plant. But I felt like they set me up for then the chapters that were a little bit more out of my reading comfort zone, to learn from her as she is communing between the living beings that my brain is still working on thinking of as beings.
Oh, there were so many good things there. Like, now I want to know what everyone's reading comfort zone was in this, and like if there were specific parts that pushed you out of it or made you feel at ease. But also the teaching. I loved that we are her students. I didn't think of that before. Why not? Hello, that's the whole thing. Yeah. And then also learning from people like her. That reminds me of the chapter when she is talking about her student's dissertation on sweetgrass, and defending it in front of the dean and many other men in science. And there's a beginning aspect of that chapter and story, and there's an end in which she speaks about the humility, and also the realization that one has to come to that science doesn't know everything and is completely objective. And yeah, the humility that would take for these male scientists who are like, no, I'm at the top of my academic game, and so I know I am the knowledge base. I have learned it all. And what does she say? Like, what am I gonna learn from these old ladies who talk to plants and didn't get a high school degree? But then they do learn from them. And the old ladies are like, well, yeah, hello, we've been telling you this forever. Yeah, and that sort of makes me think of Beth's point, like Kimmerer, Dr. Kimmerer talks a lot about like pluralism of intelligences or something, like different knowledges that we have, and that's the part of the braiding sweetgrass, or like the three sisters garden metaphor. Each strand is its own, or corn does what it does, and it doesn't change for the other ones. Scientific knowledge is really good at seeing and like breaking everything down and writing exactly what is happening. But the indigenous knowledge is a squash. And it's really good at listening and it's at listening and watching the relationships between the other things. And the corn isn't changing for the squash isn't changing for the corn, but together with the bean, they make this good place. Each of them makes everything better for the other ones. So even though there are these different ways of looking at the world, and I wish too that we had taken on and listened to those different knowledge ways earlier, we still can. And Dr. Kimmerer, I think, is hopeful that we are moving into a space of recognizing other ways of thinking and learning from them for all of us. So that's cool.
I thought the part about her student who does her thesis on the sweetgrass was one of my favorite parts of the book, because she was like, well, we don't really need the scientific method to like know that this is true, but we're going to use it and we're going to prove that it is true. And I like the broader thing that she proves there, I think, is that humans and plants evolve together, and that our typical conception of the universe now is like humans and nature are separate, which is like totally untrue. And this just proves that, like, yes, this plant and indigenous people evolved together, and the relationship proves it. And the way it grows when it's tended is different when it's just left alone. So like, for me, that's the best argument I've seen, that like humans and nature are connected, and that like we have these deep relationships and influence on how things grow.
Yeah, that chapter and the section of the honorable harvest about the trapper, I think, I thought were really interesting, because I think you can see the same relationship applying to like animals as well. Like it made me think of my brother, because he hunts, but he like is really careful about it. Like he only takes like one deer a year, and he spends hours hunting, but what he's doing is like going out and just like observing all the animals that like come through his land, and like he like knows them, like he knows all the deer, and like is very like he will like sometimes go like a year or two without taking a deer. Like he sees them, he has the opportunity, but he prefers it just like wasn't the right time. But I thought it was interesting to like apply it both like also to like animals, because you like animal management is also part of like managing plants and like the whole ecosystem. Like we're all together and part of this greater picture. That was just the thing that made me think about my brother. And get excited about bigger relationships. I don't know.
I think that's really beautiful and really honorable about your brother. And like that, the Wendigo part caught me in the heart the first time. And about your brother, that reminds me of her story. It's in here, right? I don't know if I'm mixing up books, but I don't think so. When she's talking about the hunters telling their stories, and it just is so opposite of like greater Western white culture being like, well, I got the biggest and I got the most and I got this many and let me show you the antlers, you know? Like it was talking about these hunters and the young men telling their stories, and then waiting and listening for the elder who just tells them like buck after buck that he chose not to take. And I love that, because that is the inversion of the Wendigo selfish spirit, which is consuming the world. And that's not preferable, I would think, that we're all on that same page. And it's also not a thing that we usually do, to respect people who choose not to just enrich themselves through the exploitation of others and the world. So yeah, I just really loved sharing that hunter story and seeing that different microcosm of a different sort of hunter who gets to know the animals and like knows when one is saying like, this is an honorable harvest, you know, and understanding that you are taking a life, and because of that, you are able to live. Like there's gratitude in that, and then there's reciprocity that you need to bring to the world for that. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that.
Sorry, I've had a coughing fit, but there was just one chapter that really struck me, which was the witch hazel, and how, gosh, what kind of person this Robin Wall Kimmerer is to go through that effort to make, you know, this Hazel's house home, and just that whole Christmas. I was just blown away by that. I really was. And I also want to plant witch hazel in my yard. So yeah.
I would also say that, yeah, I think that she was giving back in some part to a friend that she found there, because she was talking about how displaced she felt in being away from all of her plant friends and I'm sure family and everything else. But I love, how her daughter talked about the unlikely friendship of the botanist and this woman who'd been working with her hands, but how they were thinking the same things, like when they came over with all of the blackberries. And she's like, oh, we can't possibly take this huge gift. Like, no way. And then Hazel, is her name Hazel? Yeah, which Hazel? Yeah. Then she's like, well, this isn't from us. God gave it to us. It's for sharing. It's for everybody, you know? So that was a great overlap. Okay, I know it's 10:17, but I have two more questions for you. And one is that Sky Woman and that Eve story. And they are very different stories. And I don't think that I have to tell anyone the Eve story, but okay, the Western Judeo-Christian mindset, it's deep in there. And she starts the book with that because it's like the foundation of a worldview. And I would like to hear your thoughts about how that could have changed, Beth, like the story, if people had this different story of being caught by the animals and working together and just being gifted instead of cast out.
Well, first of all, just the agency of womanhood is completely different between those stories. And that the story of Sky Woman, I knew it beforehand, but A, it's always nice to have a refresher, and B, it's always told just slightly differently by everyone because we all hear it from different sources. So just the fact that it's Sky Woman and not Sky Man, that she was pregnant, that she still had all of this agency, even with all of the help that she was given, she is still her own person, and she is not like Eve being blamed for, the sins of the world, but instead giving to the world and helping create, I don't know if I necessarily want to use the word good, but creating one type of world, whereas Eve created a completely different type of world, or was blamed for creating a different type of world. And that definitely stood out to me. Also, my first note for my notes from reading that story was just goose music, because it was just wonderful, and I love the way that is described. The geese sang their goose music, and I was like, yes, perfect, good. But yeah, that stood out to me a lot, was just like Sky Woman has agency, and Sky Woman like brought to the world instead of taking away.
I think the other thing that stood out to me was how the story of Sky Woman feels kind of at its root like a story of abundance. Like everyone has a gift, everyone, like it's that community kind of theme where like everyone brings their gift and together we create this like larger thing that is like like healthy, right? And is like it embraces a lot of different aspects of different people. Whereas like obviously the Eve story is about being cast out, and paradise is not here but Eden, right? Like somewhere else. Whereas the story of Sky Woman, it very much felt like the world that she's creating is kind of its own paradise, that's like welcoming to a lot of different people, and like so the timbre of the stories feel like extremely different. And I think it's hard not to think about the ways that like the Judeo-Christian stories kind of set us up to feel like nature is separate from us and a thing that can be exploited or used for gain, because it's just like I feel like it's very easy to think like, well, there's Eden out there, so like what we have in front of us doesn't matter as much as when you see what's in front of you, and the way that like maybe there are things around you that are trying to give you gifts, but if you don't extend the attention to like see that offer, like how can you accept the gift that you don't recognize as being offered, right? So I think it's kind of hard not to see how that through line of the different ways that it causes people to think about their relationships with their environment and like land management. I'm from like a family of like farmers, so I can't help but think about like the difference between like, you know, like farming one way versus this other way. Because the other thing that goes through my mind is like, I grew up with this idea that like we're stewards of the land, which kind of goes along with that idea of the Eve story, where like the earth is a thing that's given to us and is our responsibility, but it doesn't have that kind of beautiful like I'm going to say this word wrong, it's too early, reciprocity. Is that right? Yes. That the Sky Woman story had.
I will just add that also that what Audrey just said makes me think of like the Judeo-Christian tradition, and the idea of like a separate Eden just leaves this space to exploit the natural world further, because it's like, well, this isn't actually the world, like we have a better world waiting for us, so we were given this to like a lot of my background. I grew up in a really religious area, and I was a vegetarian, still am, and a lot of people would be like, God gave us the animals to eat, why aren't you eating them? And I'm like, I think that's missing a lot. Like Robin Wall Kimmerer's description of reciprocity makes so much more sense to me, rather than just being like, this was given, you take it. Like, what then? Like, it makes sense to give back. It makes sense to nurture and make sure that these things that you're taking can continue living.
I think also in contrast to the Sky Woman, like it really for me was just like, yeah, guilt is really baked into like all of those religions, and just like how fundamental that part is, and how like earth is something to be endured rather than like a gift and a beautiful space to be in. And it's just, your whole mindset is different and the whole cultural framework is different. And like my parents live out west, and so I've been constantly thinking about too, like water and resources, and how like fundamentally the part of water management resources has been like, we would be stupid not to just use all this water, like it's here, so we have to use all of it. And it's just like a very different mindset of like, we should use what we need, and then it goes downstream for other people to use. So it's very different attitude to managing resources.
I felt like with the Eve story, it's not only that nature like isn't like real or whatever, it's like it's an enemy. Like, this is your punishment. You're being sent out into the world. So it's, if this is your punishment, it's hard to embrace it, I guess, and love it.
Wow, I'm really glad I asked that question, because because the Wendigo spirit, when I read that years ago now, I felt so seen, because that is something that I grew up with, but then was smooshed by greater culture and coming into adulthood. And it always was a point of confusion, being like, why, if we have more and crush others, is that winning? And then reading this book, that chapter, I just like wanted to cry in relief of being like, oh my gosh, it is the world turned on its head. And oh yeah, a place that part of me came from is flipping that back the right way. And you don't have to be crazy to think that that's actually a good way to be in the world. And until we all just like went through the creation stories together, I didn't really see how intertwined those two things were, and how, yeah, that story of setting nature against you, or being kicked out of paradise and having everything waiting for you on the other side, and like, what is this? I gotta get through it, gotta smush it, gotta dominate it. Yeah, changes everything is an entire framework of, and a way of being. All right, one more. There's only one more. What is your gift? What did this book make you think about in terms of ways that you could bring reciprocity to the world, give back, or steward, or whatever, your plant or part of the world in a particular way?
Well, this is a goal, is for me, to plant more native plants, and I'm going to be doing some other landscaping at my house, so it's a good opportunity to redo some things in my yard, and go with that, the knowledge that I've gained, and be more thoughtful.
I kind of already said that I was doing that, but that's something I'm interested in. I don't know if that's like my thing, my gift. I don't know if I know my gift yet, but like definitely thinking hard about it after reading this. And I definitely have wanted to like spread the word about native plants and spread the word about like knowing plants, because I think Marissa said this, knowing the names of plants and like knowing them in a different way has helped me a lot. Just as a person, like going outside, it just enriches the experience so much more for me. And I've always been interested in nature and like all this stuff, but like having the framework to think about it has been super helpful. So I'm still thinking about my gift.
I guess for me, it's gratitude. It's been something that I was fortunately raised with, but to facilitate the easy sharing gratitude between others. So whether it's that you're telling some being something that you're grateful for them for, but that also then creates the environment where people can take time to also think about the things in their lives that they have gratitude for.
I'm not sure if this is a gift, but it's something I'm always striving to be better at. Is just gifting, like sharing what I have. Yeah, it's hard not to give into the impulses of like, this is mine and I love it and I will keep it, instead of like sharing it with other people, or like, growing a lot of tomatoes, instead of canning all of them, I could give some away, like stuff like that, I think would be good. I also, Elizabeth and I were talking about this a few weeks ago about gardening, and I was like, am I a terrible gardener actually? Because like I will grow spinach and then I feel bad harvesting it, because I'm like, but if I take the leaves, then the plant won't be a plant anymore. And so I think just like actively like being okay with harvesting and realizing that in some cases that's good, actually. So trying to do that and then share them with other people.
I feel like this is a big, scary question that's like hard to answer if you're not immediately like, yeah, I got this. So I also fall in the category of like, I'm not 100% sure what my gift is yet. But weirdly, this book I'm a knitter and I have been for a lot of my life. And this book made me think about like the relationship you have with like the like fiber from like the animals that like then you use to make into like sweaters or whatever. And so just kind of like I think working on extending that awareness of like where our stuff comes from, like our like I think my inclination is more of like fiber artsy fabric-y than like gardening. I'm gonna try this year, but we'll see how that goes. But I think that helping people be aware of like all of the stuff that goes into like feeding us and like clothing us that we take for granted in modern society, because a lot of like clothing making, for example, happens in factories somewhere else. And we all kind of in the back of our heads know that it's a lot of work and like probably our clothes aren't made with the best practices, but there's not a lot of like attention paid to that. So this book has made me think about the way that she thinks about like relationships with like plants can also be applied to the way that we think about relationships with like animals and honorable harvests, and also just like more things than just not just, but like more things than plants and gardening as well. And like what we're giving back, and how do your actions fit into the bigger picture of the world, I guess. This is how I think about things. I don't know. This is probably why I don't know what my gift is yet. Too zoomed out.
No, I think that was a very good way of thinking about it and sharing it. Thank you.
I just had one other memory of a note I wrote from the Wendigo chapter. She made reference to a closet full of clothes being, wasteful, and yeah, that struck me too. We all have too much stuff. Emily has too many jars. Just kidding.
I promise the other one actually has jars that are filled with jam and vegetables.
And you'll share it, I know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Actually, does anyone want some peach jam? I have so much.
Absolutely, yes.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that and everybody's gifts. Thank you. I'm not really sure what mine is either, but I really love children and working with children, and I really believe in the personhood in our community of among many beings on this planet, and also respect for water, and feel like those things can be combined. Tell the children. Yeah. And if anybody else wants to share their gifts, please do. Marissa, I know you shared already, but you also unmuted.
I was unmuting to say, speaking of children, if anyone out here listening is interested in taking these gifts from this book to the young ones. In 2022, there was a young adults adaptation that was released. I think it was adapted by a different person, Monique Gray Smith. I haven't read it, but if it's anything like the adult version, I recommend it for the little ones.
Sorry, I'm laughing because I was like, oh, for my child. And then I was like, oh, absolutely not. She can't read.
Not yet.
Not yet. One day, but not yet.
I'm not sure, but I think Monique Gray Smith has some other children's books, unless I'm mixing them up.
Probably.
I don't want to force anyone else to share, so they don't have to if they don't want to. But if you think of anything, feel free. Otherwise, I release you.
Thank you.
I don't know what my gift is, but I know that this book has made it so that I think more about where things are coming from and supply chains. And I was already kind of doing that for some things, but it made me want to look into it more and maybe shop more local and hit the farmers markets more, that kind of thing. And it's made me think a lot. And I think that was the thing that I love so much about this book, is it's made me think. So.
Yeah, there were so many things to think about, time and everything. And yes, to anybody who's watching still, it's an amazing book and I hope you read it.
Sounds like a good place to stop. Thank you everyone here for sharing. Thank you all of you for watching, and thank you Ariel for facilitating, and we'll see you next time.